the whole time?
Yeah, I was in our group with
I don't
Jay
know
and Robert.
why I can't see everybody, so I was not clear who was.
Greg, it showed that being called like the entire time.
Kristen, even if you click show participants, can you not see them on your list?
I was trying to look at the gallery so I could see where everybody was, and even on the bottom, I didn't see them. So my apologies. We'll work on that. So let's make sure Todd and Steve and Greg that you guys get all of your questions answered and your comments in this large group as well. So Kelly, you want to? We did a little of everything. So our group is ready to kind of chime in. But if you wanted to start with your group and then the other groups can add.
Great, yeah. So Corey volunteered to report out, and since we're number one, we decided to report out on the first question, and we spent a lot of time discussing, what parts of the ADDIE model they use or don't use now, and discussing, having a system in place. So Corey, do you want to just give the high points of what we talked about?
Yeah, the Google Doc disappeared, so the notes are gone, but I think I can roll with it. So as far as the first one there, I think the group felt like we were doing pretty well with using the model, the ADDIE model, most, if not all of it. And just one thing that we spent a lot of time talking about, just in general, was kind of that gap analysis and like catering trainings to the audience. And I think we all collectively kind of struggled with that, feeling that trainings were fixed. There are modules, there's curriculum. You are going to deliver that content. And I don't want to say regardless of the level of experience of your audience, but you are on the hook to deliver that content, so to speak. So I think we struggled a little bit with how do we do that. And a lot of us seem to do that kind of of course, there's the develop and analyze and everything, and you hope that those learning objectives meet the goals. But at the end of the day, you show up and there's a group and you go around and say, hey, tell me about yourself and what's your level of experience. And then you may adapt accordingly, but you're still gonna crank out your content. So I think that was just a challenge, and we'd welcome, thoughts on that too.
This is Suzanne. Our group discussed that a little bit too, that we were doing great with all the phases, with the exception of the analysis, maybe not as strong there. And with, being able to tweak trainings when it made sense, but for fundamental content that has exams attached to it, it's kind of challenging to change the content when the funder or the state is requiring content to be covered.
And did you talk at all about how the funder or the state decides that content needs to be covered? Okay, are they doing the analysis?
In some, well, I can speak to Wisconsin, yes and no. There are various analysis factors that are put into place. A lot of times quality assurance site visits are used to help determine what topics, and we also reach out to the network and ask for comments on what content would you like to see covered in this training, help us prioritize it. We do that a lot before the development of a lot of different types of trainings, but not so much for the core trainings related to the IREC accreditation. No, we pretty much stick right with the skills requirements.
Yeah, in our group, a little bit toward the end, the discussion came up about that, what you're talking about, Suzanne, about the IREC accredited training, and I feel like it's a bit of a misconception that every delivery needs to include the delivery of the entire JTA versus I understand what you're saying about getting people ready for a certification exam and wanting to make sure that you've covered everything, but we're working on clarifying that the trainers and the training providers do have some flexibility in customizing that. But it sounds like there is some level of analysis going on in your group.
One of the things our group talked about too at the very end was compartmentalizing those trainings, so that, for example, I'll just use our example, is if we have a retrofit installer boot camp course, it might be made up of 4 different trainings and some prerequisites, so that we can go out and train basic blower door and air sealing anytime, but it's one of the components within that retrofit installer package. So that's how we're working our way around having to do, a 7-day boot camp or whatever that covers everything.
Yeah, compartmentalizing, or I call it modularizing, is really smart, where you have the content, and hopefully as we go through the rest of this, you'll see having those learning objectives and then tying the specific assessment items to them, and then building out your learning, the activities and content tied directly to that. Then you kind of have this a la carte menu of training content that you can pull from and customize relatively quickly. What else did people talk about? Corey was, of all of the phases of the ADDIE model, our group seemed to really like evaluation the most. That's the most fun.
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about that and how it was just satisfying to kind of, deliver your trainings and then evaluate them and get that feedback. And then as far as those that are teaching to exams or certification, that, when you see people become successful or pass that test, that was also satisfying. So there was
podium
a couple
kickers.
different.
You talking about podium kickers? People that are basically teaching to a test. They just teach you what's going to be on the test. They kick the podium when it's like, all right, this is going to be on the test.
Or more or less, not so much that, but the actual just seeing someone succeed, or, that they get it, which can be hard, but yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jay. I don't know if we have time to talk about it today, but if not, remind me to talk about this whole idea of teaching to the test and it being a bad thing. Because if it's a bad thing, then it means our test is bad.
I wanted to add something, but let's make sure we hear from the second group, who was talking a lot about analysis as well. And we wanted to kind of brainstorm some solutions. So does Robert or someone want to kind of summarize?
I think in general, we talked about that too as well, that a lot of us were familiar with ADDIE, but whether or not it was really being put in place, it's hard to say. And a lot of the concerns that we are already talking about here now is on the analysis side on the front end. Are we getting access to that analysis as trainers? Maybe somebody up above has heard that information, but it doesn't always carry down to the trainer, how reliable that analysis is. And so that's the most difficult part, and then if you go through all these steps of this analysis and we find out this is the need and these are the skills they have and everything, and then everybody's grouped into the same class at varying degrees of knowledge, it's terrible for the class to be able to keep up, or the trainer, because you got people at 3 different levels, and through no fault of the trainer, but because the decision was made by the funder or the state or whoever that says, well, this is the only class opportunity, they're all coming to the same class. And part of it is logistics and having enough people in the class. So often we find ourselves just going into development because it's a new resource, new technology. So we're really good. We know a lot about that. And we push out because we are experts in this, and we really don't think about the people that are learning it, because we just, hey, this is stuff that they need to learn. Or the JTA, a couple examples were brought up, the left or right swing of a door. Well, hey, how important is that? But yet, if you don't cover that, it's like, oh, you don't have that in your class, that GTA, and so it gets frustrating for trainers. And then on the evaluation side, yeah, some of it, they're just like canned evaluations. You know, it's the same evaluation for every course. If it's just a, you know, ask them, how did you like me? Are you, is it a popularity contest? Because it's the same trainer over and over again. It's like, yeah, he's a good person. They're a good person. I'm going to rate them high all the time. So is it really getting to how well of a job we did as trainers? So I think people thought we fell short on some of our evaluations, and how far out do we take that evaluation? Because if we're all in this program together, and this is what I brought up, is we're supposed to be saving and helping low-income customers. And do we do any sort of evaluation of how the impact of our trainings actually tie into actual savings achieved by low-income customers? So but yeah, that's where we were at.
So I heard a lot about, you know, challenges. Well, one, I heard a lot that although maybe you're reading about ADDIE for the first time or more in depth, and many people have done some parts of it or didn't call it that or things like that. I mean, everybody overall kind of had a framework for how they develop training. And it sounds like there's a recognition for the importance of an analysis if you can do it. So I wanted to kind of hear a little bit about if you're not getting that data, like Suzanne, you know, you were saying you had access to some QA, which we heard of from Robert too, which is, you know, fantastic. But it sounded like that's not always the case. So how can you get more information about the incoming audiences that you have? Like, we know it's like, we know you can make the courses better if you have kind of more information to them and you're willing to tailor it. What are some brainstorm strategies to be able to get some information? And I'm hoping that people have a chance over the next 6 weeks to actually try these different approaches.
Well, especially if it's a long term, you know, we just ask. You know, we'd say do a little introduction and tell us about, you know, give us a little biographical thing. Sometimes that's helpful.
Who do you ask and when?
So this is what I'm thinking of is, so I'm just talking about an instructor led training. But obviously if you're doing like an e-learning, like an asynchronous thing, you could have some kind of form. You could ask them to answer a few questions, or you could ask them to do a self-eval. And then obviously the self-eval, like Robert's saying, it's always as good as the way that it's written. Obviously all surveys are only as good as the survey, how it's written. But that's one of the things we would just ask. You know, oftentimes we would find there was a group of people in the room who were more technically savvy. And when I mean technically, I mean with computers. And then there was a group that wasn't. And then what we would try and do is split them, try and do exactly what we're doing here, which is break that class as often as possible, break it into smaller groups to do either group activities or breakout rooms, and try and pair or group people that have technical skills with people that don't have technical skills, and then explicitly ask them to help the rest of the group.
I think probably if you'd like that information before you begin, then you can include a few leading questions, you know, multiple choice questions, kind of like you did when we logged in to Litmus. What's your job title? You know, what's your background? Is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it HVAC? Is it carpentry? That way you know before they even step foot in the door what your demographic group looks like, as far as what it is that they do, because we all speak a different language depending on what our daily job activities are.
Thanks. Marta, you have your hand up. And Todd and Suzanne, I see you guys too.
I can take my hand down. That was me.
Oh, that was talking. Marta. Okay, Todd.
Well, I was just going to bring out, it goes two ways as well. The trainer has to also respect those who's in the class. I've never been in WAP training that I have attended yet that I didn't believe that the goal of that trainer was to embarrass me in front of the others because I knew more than them. And I'm not saying I'm an expert, but the respect goes two ways. The trainer doesn't have to be the king of the castle and the most impressive person in the universe. Feed on the strengths of the classroom and let all of them grow together. And even if they could feed amongst themselves, you got people within those classrooms that can help others to where it's not the burden of the trainer alone.
I think you're hitting on the part that it should be about the learner and not the instructor. And it's a hard thing to overcome for any of you who have been instructors, is you're the expert and you're like, if I can just give all of this information, you too will be an expert. And it is probably a little bit of an ego thing. But I think one of the biggest light bulbs that's gone off in my head as like a former high school math teacher, where I thought I was a really good teacher, and then later on, kind of putting together curriculum and learning about how people learn and things like that, I was like, wow, I did not do that good a job, and I know why. And I think it's because most of the time I kept thinking about, well, I'm going to tell them this, and I'm going to tell them this, and I'm just going to include a little bit of this. I know they need much, but I'm going to, and all of those statements was about me, the instructor, and none of these statements and none of my thinking was about the learner, like the person sitting in my classroom who's actually going to be doing the job. And so I think when I finally figured out that I can talk at somebody all day, but until that person is doing something, or I'm asking them to think about something, and then they have to use their brain and say, okay, what would I do in that case? And that's the only time that the learning happens, is when it's the person in your classroom doing that. And it changed kind of how I thought about how I would prepare activities for that person to do. So yeah, Todd, that if you can kind of help any instructors that you work with to shift that focus to the learner, I think that would help.
I did want to say that it was nobody in this group, so I'm just.
Okay.
I already knew that.
Yeah.
I did want to put that out there. So I'm not at all critiquing trainers, but there is. I mean, I've been to some courses where I've learned more doing homework than I did in the classroom, and it shouldn't be that way.
Well, but that's because that's when you were doing something and you weren't just passively having someone talk at you, I think, is maybe something that you experience. And so the more that we can design activities or even questions, like how many times have you asked people questions in your classroom and then answered them before they even had a chance to think about them and answer? Because it's when you ask them the question, that's fantastic, because you're getting them to think about it. But then when we don't give them enough time to just go in their head, then we've defeated the whole purpose of mentally engaging them and things like that. So let's continue that thread for sure. Suzanne, you had your hand up as well. Go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, I was just going to add one thing, and I was also going to say, Suzanne, I know you've had your hand up, so you go next. But just to add one tiny thing to Todd, I'm very sorry that you've had that experience in your weatherization training. But to add to what Kristen said, if you can internalize that lesson when you're developing your own training, which I'm sure you will, I think one of the things that took me a little while to learn, but is super helpful, is, at the end of this training, the learners that were at my class, they don't need to know that I know all this stuff. They need to know this stuff. So I can play dumb. I can ask questions and let them fill in blanks and answer things. And just that whole shift of, it's not about me as an instructor, it's about them. I think that having that experience, though unfortunate, will help make you a much better trainer. So sorry.
And for me, just a quick comment on that. I'm grateful in a way that I've been through that, because it helps you to see what you don't want to become when you administer the training. So yes, I'm grateful for the training, but I'm also grateful for what I've been going through and learned from it.
Suzanne, take it away.
So 2 things that we've used in the past to gather intel, analysis ahead of time is, as the training team comes up with a list of content, we then, in various modules, we might go out to the network and say, can you rank these 1 to 5, or 1 to 3? A, I know this already, I don't need it. B, I'm somewhat skilled here, or C, I got this, you don't need to cover it. So if it's a training that we're going to be developing, we might send that out and then use that to help us design it. That's typically not what we do for our fundamentals type courses, our building block courses, but our more intermediate advanced courses, we might approach it that way. And then secondarily, Wisconsin has a group of technical staff that gather virtually now, but soon to be back in person. And 1 or 2 times a year, I will attend, or one of our staff will attend their meeting, and we'll have a couple of training topics, break them into small groups, and have them help us come up with what the content should be for an upcoming training. And then bring it back to the whole group for additional feedback. So those are a couple different ways we've tried to gain that analysis in front of building a training.
So let's make sure, I know this is a big group, and especially since I left out some people on my group because I didn't see them, let's make sure that we hear from folks who haven't said anything yet. There's really good listeners, to make sure that if you have questions or suggestions, maybe other people can offer you feedback about kind of what you are doing or what you'd like to do, or if you've had any kind of observations, over the last week as you've kind of been learning more about this theoretical systems design.
It looks like Pam has her hand up.
Well, I had 2 more questions after Kristen, so I can wait.
Okay.
I think you should ask them.
All right. The first is in our group, one of the things that we talked about right near the end was kind of the limitations presented by funding. Obviously, in the best universe, we all would like to create the most fabulous content that would really bring in all learners and help us out and help the entire nation out with this work. But there are limits of funding. So within conversations, if we can share any ideas about how to balance that, that would be terrific. And then my second question was, I heard what y'all were saying about when you have groups where the learners are not balanced, like you have 4 new people and 2 people who have been around the block a few times. Obviously, it's great if you can get them to help in instruction or do that. My question to the group is, um, how do you make sure that, 1, that they know what they're talking about before they start telling people, or 2, how do you get the jaded, oh, we don't do it that way in the field, that's not how it's really done, talk from happening during that too. So any ideas y'all have would be great.
I mean, I would just try to ping on those experienced folks in the lecture and just to break it up so it's not so much, if you've got that experienced person, just call on them to participate or answer a question or, do something, I guess would help. I don't logistically know how I would split people.
They're good questions, and I know everybody has faced that before, and you've probably dealt with it in the class at the time. But thinking about if there was kind of a more across the board approach that you could take. Did anybody else have any other suggestions about those particular examples of either balancing your desire for a training with the actual resources you have to develop the training, or handling that diverse group of people in the class?
Well, I think 2 things. One, I mean, remember that the ADDIE process is supposed to be a cycle. So, you may have, the evaluation part is is where we take a chance to look and see what we did wrong and how we're going to fix it the next time for the next iteration. So you're not, it's not a zero-sum game. It's just, you're always going to be trying to improve and build on it. So you don't, I guess the point is, you don't expect, the expectation is not that it's going to be perfect the first time. The expectation is that when you're done, you're going to look back and see what wasn't perfect and then try and get a little bit closer to perfect every time. So it's always going to be it's constant. But again, I think as far as having an unbalanced group, or a group of people that, like I said, I think it's great to break them into smaller groups, and what I would do to specifically, Pamela, is make sure that you are constantly checking in and listening to what's going on in those small groups. You don't just break them up and be like, all right, what did everybody do when they left? And like, Tom taught me that, that I could smoke anytime I want or whatever, so you have to be on top of that. Make sure that you're course correcting constantly when you break into small groups.
I think that, Pam, I think it's a really interesting question. I think that it is really common for, and a good practice too, if there are those more experienced people, go ahead and let them, share that experience, because they learn through the process, just like you're all going to learn from each other by giving feedback and these interactions. But that question of how do you make sure that what they're training is correct gets at something that came up in our group's discussion, was just the notion of learning activities and what is like learning content. And most people traditionally think of that as, a PowerPoint or a recorded video. But I hope that over the course of the 6 weeks, you'll see that learning content can also include rubrics for hands-on activities. So if you have a rubric of what you would be looking at if, say, somebody is setting up a house for worst case CAS depressurization, and that any instructor could objectively rate their performance, then if you have that more experienced person in the class and you have this tool that you can give not only them, but everyone else who's going to be in their group, it kind of can help avoid straying too far off the mark when it comes to the actual technical stuff, as long as they're looking at it. If that person who's claiming to be an expert is veering off script of what the actual standard is that you have in your rubric, then your other learners should be ideally engaged enough to recognize that and say, hey, well, that's not what it says here, and this is what we're going to be tested on. So I think maybe I'll call the big instructor over or something like that. So when you're thinking about the content to be developing, and we'll jump into assessments 2 weeks from now and rubrics the week after that as part of the assessments, I think that might be a really good tool to help in that exact scenario.
Thank you, Kelly. I brought it up because part of the previous comment made me really think about it. It's a fine line between, monitoring the content that's out there and what people are saying, helping to bring them in to add value to the training. And then lastly, making sure that nobody is getting shamed as a result of the learning process. So it's a really, instructing is far underpaid, but I think we need to consider all of those things as we're setting up these trainings to make sure we're doing the best we can for our learners.
Yeah, and Jay had a nice thing in the comment, and then I think we had another, Joe's had his hand up, but great suggestion, Jay, is ask them to build their own rubric. Like, okay, yeah, you can take the lead on this part. Show me what rubric you're going to use to evaluate the learners. If you have the time, that would be a cool approach. I think Joe, yeah, you're the only one with your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to what was said a little while ago. I just had a class last week where I had 6 people. In Niswata here, we're still limiting our class group sizes to 6. I don't know if you guys are on board with that or you're going with bigger numbers. We're ready to move on. But anyways, I had one person in the class that was kind of did things backwards. It was really no fault of his. I mean, he went from BA to envelope back to boot camp. So I'm really not sure why he used that course. It wasn't his fault. But anyway, I had him help with the hands-on part of my blower door setup. The other four or five people had never set up a blower door, so I let him lead the instruction. And I actually learned. I mean, I've been out of the field now for 12 years, and I've only been in the class. I've been in the classroom now for 12 years, so I'm actually learning from some of these people that are out in the field every day. And I learned something from him on the way he set up his blower door. And it really went it went a little bit quicker than normal. But, you know, I agree with letting somebody that has more experience kind of help lead, especially hands-on activities. It really helped in my group. So that's all I got there.
Thanks.
Mhm.
I want to do, we've got about 10 minutes left, and we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming week, but I did want to give people something to think about over the next week. The diversity of the group that comes in is a real challenge for the instructors, but also for those people in the room, right? You got people who are bored, you got people who are in way over their head. You know, what can we do about that? And so and Suzanne talked a little bit about it with kind of the way they modularize things and prerequisites. So that's the main thing I want people to think about. And I know in some cases you're very restricted by, you know, somebody sends you a class or your funder, and so you might not have a lot of choice on who comes in. But if you are able to control any of those things, and by that I mean kind of like prerequisites, it would be great to say, okay, if I want people to leave the class at this level and they need to be able to do this, this, and this, and we'll talk more about this in the learning objectives. If there's prerequisite knowledge that they need to have in order to kind of start your class, you know, now that we've had all this practice online, you know, I encourage people to think about, could you put any of these prerequisite knowledge classes online? And it sounded like that could be both technical knowledge, but it also could be, you know, basic math and keyboarding and things like that. And so if you have prerequisite knowledge that they need to have in order to be successful in your course, I think we need to pay more attention to how we can bolster those kind of other classes that complement what you're doing. And then what you see, hopefully, is if you can verify what knowledge and skills people come into the class with, because either they've been in the field, or they've taken these other classes that will give them that base level knowledge. I think the whole, you know, curriculum is going to work better, because now you've got everybody roughly at the same level, so you can kind of continue to build on those things. You would still do all of those other things where you access the knowledge that people have and help them to teach each other and all those kind of good adult learning principles. But just being able to kind of verify what kind of knowledge people come in with, you could have an little entrance test people take. You could, you know, have that online training people take. If like Suzanne has, maybe there's other classes, you've got to take this class first before that. I know it's not necessarily easy, but if you can move toward that model of somehow verifying prerequisite skills and knowledge, then it kind of does a better service for everybody that ends up getting into that technical class. So I just wanted to put that ideas in people's head. I know there's a lot of logistical limitations too. It's not just as easy as that.
And when you get to week 5, the lesson plan lesson, there are a couple of guided activities where you'll see one approach to looking at your curriculum through that lens of what part of this could I shift to online so that my in-person live time with them is the most effective use of our in-person live time. So now that we're at the top of the hour, Kristen, I was trying to remember how we normally do this. Do we just put them on the spot and ask them to tell us what they have to do next week, or do we do an overview and then someone restate it?
Yeah, no, I think if everybody has access to, you know, the online learning management system, we just want to make sure, you know, you can kind of log in and take a look for ISD 2. Okay, that's the learning objectives module. it would be great if one or more people could summarize kind of what is planned for this coming week, so that you know what you're working on, what you have due, your assignment, and kind of how you're going to get feedback from your peers, and where you're going to document your learning objectives. So if you want to look online, and Kelly, if you want to share your screen, you could probably show people. And then, yes, we are going to put our learners on the spot to make sure that at least one person can tell us what they're going to work on this week.
I will share my screen. Hold on, it had logged me out. Or, you know, if you can go on your own and find it, please do.
While you're learning.
How about someone we haven't heard from yet who can kind of tell us what we're going to work on this week?
You'll be writing objectives. You'll be looking at the domains of learning. So there's the cognitive, the affective, and the psychomotor. And most people skip over the affective, which is really important. You gotta get people, you gotta grab them at their heartstrings, and what you're saying and what you're teaching is important. If you just focus on cognitive and psychomotor and don't give affective slides maybe or points at the beginning of your training, I think you're missing it. So I think those are the domains of learning: cognitive, affective, and psychomotor, which sometimes you can't do online. And then obviously you'll be looking at the domains of learning. So basic knowledge, comprehension, application. That's probably as high as you can go in many cases. Otherwise, you get to analysis and synthesis. So that type of thing. And just, you know, objectives. Objectives are what are the students going to do during the training. It's not what you're going to do. It's what they're going to do, what they have to be able to demonstrate to you during that day or that week, so that you know that those objectives are meeting the overall goal. That's what I get out of the list.
Excellent. Okay, so that's what you're going to work on. Who can tell me what the assignment is for the week?
I think it is to review others' work and give comment and submit ours. Like after we saw maybe there are comments, we can revise that one and submit the assignment.
Also to write 5 learning objectives.
Great.
At least.
Yeah. Where are you going to write your 5 learning objectives?
In the Google Drive document with our names on them.
Excellent. So if anybody still doesn't have a copy, let us know, we can help you. But in this folder, WAP ISD Cohort 2, everybody should have kind of a copy of the coursework template. And this is a blank one. And Kelly's added a lot of notes in here. You can keep them or you can get rid of them, because this is your working document. And this is kind of the start of this document, and we're going to build on this. So please try to pick a lesson that I think we said is, 1 to 4 hours, and try to build these learning objectives on a job task analysis if you can. Obviously, it doesn't have to be the whole job task analysis, but what you're trying to do is, be able to kind of tie these learning objectives to the job task. What do they need to do on the job? And please try to, after you take your lesson, identify kind of the cognitive level of learning and vary that level as well. In other words, you're definitely going to want to get to at least the application level of learning there. So everybody has a shared document, and anytime you want to peek at someone else's work, you can go into this folder and you can look at what they're doing. And ideally, you will take time to go in and comment on somebody's on somebody's work. And the best way to do that is to use this rubric for evaluating learning objectives. So you can say, okay, how well did they do writing the objectives from the perspective of the learner? You know, did they do poor to very good? And then we've got kind of the criteria here. How specific are they? Could I make a suggestion to help make them more specific? Are they measurable and clear? And then if they're all for kind of one job task, are they related, or did somebody kind of get off topic with their learning objectives? So please, when you're kind of reviewing your own learning objectives, when you're writing them, use this rubric to evaluate your own, and then look at somebody else's. And Kelly, I don't know if we had suggestions about how, you know, who's to comment on, but use this document when you're providing suggestions to someone else.
Where do we find that rubric? And can you send a link out to where we put our documents again?
So the rubric is in the additional references section. So when you go to the lesson 2, the ISD2, definitely start with the overview for the week. And that's that Word document that says, okay, this is what we hope you get out of this week. These are the additional references you're going to find. This is the to-do list. And then also there's a little video if you'd rather kind of watch a video introduction of that. And then so the rubric for evaluating is one of the additional references, along with some information about verbs that help you to write those learning objectives. And where, Kelly, did we put the link to this folder? Where's the best place to access that?
To where everyone's assignments are?
Yeah.
I believe we've emailed it out a couple times. I will I'll email it again, and I think I will try to see if there's some kind of common place that I can put it. But you know what? I think that was Robert asking. I'm going to put it in the chat right now. So that's our shared folder where everybody's assignments are. And we hadn't figured out how we were going to pair people off. Last session, we just kind of let it be a little bit organic of, you know, if you see someone working on a topic that you're really interested in and you would like to go look at their work, or you see, you know, your arch nemesis and you want to go in and just talk some trash about how crummy their learning objectives are, you can just pick out, I jest, of course, but we'll leave it kind of organic unless you tell us otherwise. So this is the first week where you're actually doing an assignment, you're doing it in a public venue, and then you're providing feedback on someone else's, because we think a lot of the learning is applying what you've learned not only to your own work, but to looking at other people's and seeing how they've applied the principles and how you can critique and help improve those. And so next week on our live meeting, we'll check in and find out how that peer review process went for you, because we want to make sure you're all getting feedback. You'll all get feedback from Kristen and I, but we want you also to get feedback from the class. So if we determine, if you think it would be easier if we kind of team you up, then we can do that. So be thinking about that as you go through the week. But the ideally, you'll have your stuff ready for people to comment on at the latest maybe by the end of Monday. So they have time to go in and provide some feedback before our live session, and you can have had that whole experience. So think about that when you're planning out how to spend your week. I think that's everything. But yeah, always look at the additional references. There might be stuff there that you don't necessarily need, but like that rubric will be really helpful in providing feedback and looking at your own stuff. And the verb sheet, for sure, it just really helps you think about using the right verb for the level of learning. Yeah, I think that was it, Kristen. Did I leave anything out?
Nope, I think that's about it. And always, if you have questions throughout the week or epiphanies, please send us an email. We're happy to answer any questions throughout the week before we meet again next Wednesday.
Well, one just idea is since we have our email list with everyone on it, if you all don't mind, I know people sometimes don't like getting inundated with emails, but if you want to let the class know when your stuff is up there and ready for someone to look at, you could just send a note. You could even maybe pick some people from your working group. It's kind of up to you, but you could send an email saying, I finished my learning objectives. I'm ready for some feedback. Does someone want to volunteer and go in and provide some feedback? That might be a nice way to do it. So yeah. I'm really excited to see what you come up with. I was very impressed with the last cohort, and y'all are just way smarter and more attractive than them. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we get. Don't tell them I said that.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We will see you next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
And Robin and Kelly, I had a quick question for you.
Oh, hang on.
I know everybody is popping off. Robin, are you going back to vacation, or did you want to debrief? And if you wanted to debrief, did you want to do it now